I'm a proud Pittsburgher, born in Pittsburgh, PA on October 18th, 1945. My dad was a sign painter. He would paint those buildings on the side of a brick wall. Dad's root beer, and that's what he did for a living. He had his own business. My mom raised 8 kids. I was not wanting to be a pilot, and I was on my junior year at the University of Pittsburgh, and a fellow engineering student, Steve Porak, says to me, let's go to a summer in Akron, Ohio, and he says, I want to be a pilot. And I said, well, if you're going to get your pilot's license, I'll get mine with you. And so in the summer of 1965, me and Steve got our private pilot's license in a Cessna 150. I just went along for the ride.
Why Akron?
Well, we were at Firestone Tire and Rubber Company making tires as chemical engineers for Firestone. Well, we had 8 kids, and I was the head of the second half of the family. 5, 6, 7, and 8 all followed me around, and I went to Central Catholic High School, and I played football as a freshman, and I wasn't fast enough, and then they put me on the cross-country team, and I ended up running cross-country, and then went on to the University of Pittsburgh, which was right down the street from where Central Catholic is. In 5th grade, I got all D's, and my dad told me to bring all my books home every day. And by 8th grade, I was a straight A student, and I graduated as a straight A student in high school. And I was magna cum laude at Pitt, chemical engineering. And then I went on and got a master's degree in chemical engineering. Well, the rough part about college is I really wanted to be a chemical engineer, and I wasn't allowed to finish my PhD because it was 1969 and the Vietnam War was on, and I got a draft number of 13, and I knew I could kiss my butt goodbye. So I was only allowed 1 year of master's, and then I ended up getting drafted and decided to go fly since I had a private license and joined the Air Force. I was told I was going to be drafted, okay? And I had worked the summer at Gulf Research. And so I called them and said, can I go back to work for you? And they said, sure. And they told me I was going to be drafted, and then we put in for a critical skills deferment as a chemical engineer instead of getting a PhD. And the same day that I got my deferment for being a chemical engineer, I got my acceptance to flight training, and my boss at Gulf Research says, I was in the Army Air Corps, I want you to be a pilot, I'll pay half your salary, you go into the Air Force and come back and you'll be a better man for me. I said, oh, okay, I'll do that. And I signed up for pilot training. I was accepted into pilot training and 3 months of OTS and off to pilot training. The pilot training was the first airplane we flew for a month in Arizona. I was at Williams Air Force Base, was a Cessna. So I was very familiar with that. And then we went to the Tweet, the T-37, where we spent the next 5 months. And then we went to T-38, the really neat plane. And I finished about a third in my class. And the first 5 guys took fighters, and I couldn't get a 141 because I wanted to be an airline pilot, and I got a C-130 and got assigned to Little Rock Air Force Base. Well, I'm going to tell you 2 stories of my time as a C-130 pilot, which covered 25 years. I think it's a very interesting story, and I'm telling you this because my kids have never asked me about it, but they're very significant stories in that they match. As a second lieutenant, I was called to Vietnam, and then as a high school chemistry teacher, 20 years later, as a lieutenant colonel, I was elected to be the commander of the exact same mission. It's only 2 times in history that this mission was executed, and I was a part of both of them. So it's a very proud story for me. It was 1972, and I was going to be my brother's best man in April, and we got called up on a minute's notice to go to Vietnam, the whole unit, the 61st Tactical Air Squadron at Little Rock Air Force Base. So we deployed, And our mission, the reason we went over is we were AWOD's capable, all-weather air delivery system. Very sophisticated, brand new. We're the only squadron that had it. In Vietnam, one of the main things that the C-130 did was fly at 500 feet and resupply. And they were getting shot. Half of the C-130s in '72 were shot trying to resupply these trapped Marines. So we went into Tan Son Nhut, and for 15 days we were there, and 15 days we went and flew channel missions in the Pacific up in Taiwan. But our mission was to go into this soccer field in An Loc, right near the Cambodian border. Marines were trapped in there in this soccer field. And we were doing no offensive missions, we were defensive, and so they didn't want to send ground troops in to relieve them. And the C-130s were getting shot out of the sky resupplying these people at 500 feet. So they wanted us to go in at 16 to 19,000 feet using this brand new AWOD's all-weather air delivery, where we would fly over at, say, 16,000 feet. This computerized AWODs would compute the winds and everything, and it would drop a green light, and this bundle would go out. It would fall down to 2,000 feet. There was a barometric cutter on it. The chute went up 500 pounds. 16 of them went out the back of the airplane, opened up, and went into the soccer field. Half of them got into the soccer field, but the Viet Cong couldn't use them because guess what they wanted to the Marines on the ground? They requested B&B, Budweiser and bullets. And it was incredible. We would load 105 howitzers and cases of Budweiser. And I could just imagine what was going on in the ground there. These Marines were shooting 105s for 12 hours to keep the Viet Cong at bay. And I knew what they were doing with the other 12 hours. And we did that for 4 months. And it's the first and only time that AWODS was ever used for high weather or for a high level air delivery. After that, there was no need for it until 20 years later. And that's the second part of the story. Okay, so after Vietnam, in '73, they had what's called Palace Chase. And you could leave because they were getting rid of pilots. And I had 3.5 of my 5-year tour in, and my boss is waiting back there in Pittsburgh, and I said, I can give a 1.5 years back if I'll get 3 years to the Pittsburgh Reserve C-130 unit. He said, come on, go join the reserves out at Pittsburgh. They had C-130s out there. So I agreed to fly in the reserves C-130s at Greater Pittsburgh Airport in the same city where I was going back to my job as a chemical engineer for Gulf Research. And I loved it. It was great. I mean, I worked with the chemical engineer and then would fly 1 or 2 weekends a month, C-130s. And I ended up doing that for 27 years, total time in the service, so that I could get a retirement. And the highest rank you could get is lieutenant colonel. So it was near the end of my tour. I had to retire in '95 with 27 years. But at that time, Gulf Research had left town, and I had 5 kids. And during that time, Gulf was bought by Chevron, and I didn't want to go leave my unit and go out to California. And so I became a chemistry teacher in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. And in 1992, as a lieutenant colonel, I'm teaching in the inner city of Pittsburgh at Westinghouse High School, where I grew up. It was a Irish ghetto, and now it was an African-American ghetto. And I was teaching there, and I loved it. And I had the summers off to go fly C-130s all over the world. So for me, it was a great job. My wife didn't like it because you didn't make that much money as a chemistry teacher. But anyways, it was a Wednesday. It was third period, and I got called to the principal in March of '92. He said, I want you to command a 6-ship C-130s from all over the United States, because Bosnia, the Serbs have kept the UN trucks from delivering food to Srebrenica and Grozny right there on the Serbian border. and we want you to fly high level, just like you did 20 years ago in Vietnam. I said, I can do this. So that was Wednesday afternoon. The next day, I told my kids goodbye, and that Sunday, we dropped our first mission. It was on CNN in Bosnia. We were out of Rhein-Main Air Base in Germany and would fly down, and they would then, the first mission, I was the commander. I was behind the two pilots in my Pittsburgh C-130. We had 5 other planes behind us, French, German, Russian, Canadian, and whatever. There were 6 of us. And we were the lead because we had an AWODS bird at Pittsburgh. And they wanted us to go in, use our system, get the green light for the other ones, and drop the things. And it was funny as we were going in because the Serbs were shooting the planes that tried to go at low level. And they claimed they weren't, but at 16,000 feet, we didn't have to worry. The only thing that would get us is SAM missiles. So there we were. That Sunday, 3 days earlier, I was teaching, and we dropped 500-pound bundles. It wasn't Budweiser and bullets, but it was medicine and food to the Bosnian Muslims. It was really funny because on our way in, they had spotlights on the ground, and the Serbs were looking for the German airplanes to try to shoot at them. But 20 years later, there we were doing the same mission, and that's the only other time in history. We had 8 aircraft, all AWODs, okay, and there was 3 other units in the United States, so we put a 6-ship together and went over with the AWODS airplanes. And when we got there, the C-130 unit at Frankfurt wanted to take our airplanes and get the credit. And I called the general back home, and he says, don't you let them do that. So we ended up, as reservists, doing this mission and made CNN. They had done it. I couldn't believe they knew that I had done that 20 years ago. I didn't even know my unit knew that that's what I did on active duty, but it was pretty cool. Well, my students, I was in the inner city.
Look at here.
I was in the inner city, and they didn't have much respect for a lieutenant colonel, and I was just a regular, and they were upset that I was going. They probably didn't even know what the heck I was doing, except that I was a reserve C-130 pilot. And I was back a month later. They had me back. They promised that it would only be a 1-month tour, and I got back in a month, yes. Well, the C-130 is an exceptional aircraft, and I ended up getting my son to fly it, and he's a American Airlines pilot today, 747. But the C-130, 1950 airplane, and it's a turbojet, and its functionality was it can go and land on a short field because you can put the props in the reverse. And that's very unique. And so we could land on a 3,000-foot unprepared strip in Vietnam. And with JADO assist, we could get out of 1,500 feet. So it was an incredible airplane in its ability to come over. In fact, in order to avoid gunfire, we would come over at 4,500 feet above of the field, and we would pull power back to idle, put full flaps, and would spiral down so that the people on the perimeter couldn't shoot at us, and land on the first 500 foot of a 3,000-foot strip. Talk about pilot excellence. That was really an incredible airplane to do that. And 155,000-pound gross weight, and could carry, a Sherman tank. So that was the C-130, and I just happened to get assigned it, active duty, and sure enough at Pittsburgh, got it a year after I come out into the reserves. I flew C-123, the Con Air airplane, for the first year, and then we got rid of the C-123. I was so glad there was no hydraulic system in that, and I ended up in the C-130, and it was the same E model. So, and then we got the AWODS planes, and I said, wow, it was meant to be. Well, at C-130, we learned to fly the normal airdrops, missions and low level. So we were there flying, learning, and we got pulled down to do South America. We would do air stops, flew all over South America on tours. I spent 6 weeks in the Canal Zone in Howard Air Force Base. Spent a month and a half in Europe in Mildenhall there. So that's what we did. We were pretty much on the go a lot. And during that time at Little Rock, I was asked to fly a C-130 over to Vietnam. So I had been there to deliver a C-130, but it wasn't until I was there for 2 years that we got deployed. When I ferried that airplane, that was several months before we got transferred over, and the guy that was my captain on that flight ended up being the general in Bosnia that I had to work under that tried to steal our airplanes. He was the guy on the ferry flight that I took.
So, tell me about the workup before your deployment to Vietnam.
Not much. We were called and bam, we were gone. They needed people over there. Those people needed that food. We had to get over there for those Marines because 50% of the C-130s were battle damaged from being hosed down on these 500-foot runs. I had 30 missions over a 4-month period where we dropped.
Oh, that was all. Those were all high altitude drops?
They were all right down at 9,000 feet. They had 37 AAA. If they had 57, they could have reached us. But the whole sky down at 10,000 feet was just black with flak. And I remember, a lot of people were afraid to go into combat. And I remember, you never know how you're good. I remember saying, wow, is this cool? As we're flying over, dropping with all this flak going on. But that's why they were combat missions, because we were being shot at.
Where were you based out of?
Where? In
Vietnam.
In Ton Son Nhut. We would spend 2 weeks in Taiwan at CCK flying channel missions all over the Pacific, and then 2 weeks we would go in and fly these combat missions. And we did that for 4 months. A channel mission is delivering cargo to Okinawa or Wake or Philippines, just resupplying different places in the Pacific.
Describe the activity at Ton Son Nhut.
Well, the first time I went in there, at night you see all these flares coming down from the sky because they were pretty close to Saigon at that time, and it just was interesting. We went in and there's all kind of bunkers, and I remember the first thing I saw was this young, small Vietnamese guy. He's loading the Budweiser in these 500-pound bundles, and somehow the bundle fell on him and crushed him, and I knew I was in a dangerous situation. It wasn't very long before, in '73, in January, that we had went to Mildenhall, and they said, do you want to take Palace Chase and get out a year and a half early? And I said, sign me up. And I went back to Pittsburgh. There's an interesting story with the reserves. I really liked it because it was very informal. When we were getting inspections, we used sir and all that, but it was just a wonderful group of people, very knowledgeable. We were there for 22 years in Pittsburgh, and so got to know a lot of good friends. And there's an interesting story to this. After 15 years of being a chemical engineer, I told you Chevron bought the company, and I wanted to teach because I had taught in my church, and I said that's what I want to do, and my wife's upset about it. But then I got a job with USX Corporation flying G3s, and I did that for a year and a half, and I was gone from home, and that's when I got a teaching job. But the reserves allowed me to do all of that, the extra money that I made, especially as a summer, as a teacher. I was able to make up most of the difference between a C-130 engineer salary and what I got as a teacher and a C-130 reservist. So it was great for me. And today I've got my 60 years, I got TRICARE for life, which is wonderful stuff, and a pension, a couple thousand a month. Well, the G3 was something else because we flew all over, and one of the greatest missions that happened to me in the G3 is we were taking the USX Boss to Rome. So we had flown over, and I remember going out of Pittsburgh and flying all the way to Germany in 7 hours without stopping at Newfoundland to refuel, which was really great. But while we were in Rome, that was when the F-111s, do you remember the F-111s of 87? We're at Rome airport with the boss, and we're down at Frascati, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we get a call. We had been sipping on the local brew, and we had to take off at 10 o'clock that night. And when we took off and went back, the next day we landed at Cambridge, we read the paper that we were at Mildenhall. That's where Cambridge is, and the Lakenheath is where the F-111s took out. They went the opposite way that night, and the security they gave the boss that we weren't told what was going to happen that night. So the G3 was a pretty neat airplane, I got to admit. Oh, I didn't enjoy flying the C3 because we had slow turns. I mean, I had fun in the C-130, so I enjoyed the time in the reserves as a C-130. Flying a G3, nice airplane, but it didn't give me the thrills that a C-130 gives you.
So what was the corporate life like?
I didn't like it. I told you I was gone all the time, and so a year and a half into that, I got a teaching job, teaching in the inner city chemistry. 40 years old. Well, certainly the Bosnia mission was the highlight of my career in the reserves. The reserves weren't like they are today. Just to get a point in here, my son, Sean, was at Notre Dame. All 5 of my kids went to Notre Dame. I told him to go to Pitt. It's 3 times as expensive, but anytime. Anyways, my second son, Sean, his junior year said, I want to be a pilot, Dad. And I said, well, I'll get you a job at the reserves unit working in maintenance. And he did, and they have a program there that they send one pilot to be a, and he took the test and scored the highest score. He was really smart. And he got sent away for a year of pilot training, came back to Pittsburgh and had a 10-year commitment as a reservist. And now he's a 737 pilot for American Airlines. So, but that wasn't a very enjoyable reserve assignment like I had. We went in he had to go to Afghanistan 3 times in 1 year. You can't keep a job doing that kind. And fortunately, just recently they're laying back. But back there, when he first went through in the 20s, 2005 and 6, they were going. Reserve job wasn't very much fun because you were on the road at combat and you couldn't keep a job like that, any decent job. I couldn't have kept the C1 chemical engineering job. So I wanted to tell you the story of this B-17. Is this a good time?
Yeah, sure.
This is a really interesting story, and we're going to bury him Wednesday. His name is Irv Durda. Irv lived with me up till 4 months ago at this retirement community at Notre Dame. Holy Cross Village is where I live. And he was a B-17 pilot, and he'd always talk, and we didn't like him because he went to the University of Michigan, and we were very competitors, but I had dinner with him a lot. And his story, when he told me his story, and he didn't talk about it when he was alive. I only learned about it when he passed away 4 months ago. But he apparently had 35 combat missions over Germany in a B-17. Now, normally 25 was the limit. And I said, Irv, how did you get 35? That's crazy. And he said, I was there. First of all, he went to school in South Bend, went to Michigan. After 2 years at Michigan, he got pulled into to fly B-17.